I never imagined a quiet neighborhood like ours could become the center of such chaos. For years, my family and I lived in what seemed like an ordinary suburban community, tucked away beneath rows of neatly trimmed hedges and pastel-colored houses. The kind of place where children played on sidewalks and neighbors greeted each other with a polite nod. But beneath that calm surface, tensions simmered, and no one could have predicted how deeply those tensions would affect my daughter's fragile life. My daughter Lily is a brave soul. She's lived with kidney failure since she was just a toddler, and every day she depends on a dialysis machine to survive. That machine is more than just a piece of equipment, it's her lifeline. I watch her sometimes, lying quietly as the machine hums softly beside her, steady and reliable in a world that can feel so uncertain. Our home has become a sanctuary, where we cherish every moment, careful not to let outside troubles creep inside. I am someone you might not expect to find in a place like this. I serve as the chief minister of our state. But I keep that part of my life carefully separate from our neighborhood, because here, I just want to be a father, not a politician. I've learned the hard way that power doesn't always protect you, especially when people judge you only by the surface. Most of our neighbors know me simply as a quiet man who keeps to himself, often seen helping Lily or fixing something in the yard. Living under the watchful eye of the Homeowners Association was a challenge, but nothing prepared me for Karen. She is the kind of person who thrives on control, who sees rules as a weapon and obedience as a victory. From the moment she moved in as HOA president, her presence was like a storm gathering on the horizon, quiet at first but growing stronger with every passing day. She took an interest in every little detail, from the color of the mailboxes to the placement of garden gnomes, and she never hesitated to use her authority to intimidate anyone who dared to question her. I thought I understood the nature of this woman, until the day she crossed a line I never thought possible, the day she destroyed Lily's dialysis machine. Living in a community means sharing space, but under Karen's rule, it felt like living under a microscope. From the moment she took over the HOA presidency, there was a shift in the atmosphere, subtle at first but growing heavier by the week. Karen had a way of making everyone feel as though they were under constant scrutiny, her sharp eyes watching for any small misstep. It wasn't just about keeping the neighborhood tidy, it was about control, about making sure everyone bowed to her will without question. She wielded the HOA's rules like a weapon, often twisting them to fit her own agenda. A crooked flower pot on a porch could earn a warning letter, and an untidy lawn became grounds for fines. At first, I tried to ignore these petty battles, focusing on Lily's health and our family's well-being. But Karen's interference crept into every corner of our lives. Her insistence on enforcing every rule with an iron fist left little room for compassion or understanding, even when it came to a child's medical needs. One afternoon I found a letter slipped under our door accusing us of violating the HOA's landscaping standards. It was absurd. We had done nothing wrong, but Karen's disdain for anything that didn't fit her perfect vision was clear. I called her to reason with her, hoping she would understand the challenges we faced with Lily's condition. Instead, she was cold and dismissive, her voice dripping with condescension. She insisted that rules were rules and that exceptions would not be made. It felt as though she saw us not as neighbors, but as obstacles in her path to total domination. Her control extended beyond paperwork and fines. Karen hosted meetings where she monopolized the conversation, cutting off anyone who dared to challenge her authority. I attended once, hoping to speak up for families like mine, but was met with thinly veiled hostility. It was clear she wanted absolute obedience, not dialogue. Even casual conversations between neighbors became strained, as people grew fearful of becoming targets for her wrath. Despite her harshness, I remained careful not to expose my true identity. Karen had no idea I was the chief minister. I observed her closely, noting how her power came from intimidation and fear rather than respect. It was frustrating to see how her influence poisoned what should have been a community built on trust. Little did I know then that the worst was yet to come, and that her cruelty would soon threaten everything I held dear. The morning started like any other, quiet and routine, but it quickly turned into the darkest day of my life. Lily's dialysis machine sat humming softly in the corner of her bedroom, a steady presence that had become part of our daily rhythm. That machine was her guardian, the difference between life and death, and every beep, every light, was a reminder of how fragile her existence was. I had just finished preparing breakfast when I heard a crash from down the hall. My heart tightened as I rushed toward her room, fearing the worst. When I stepped inside, the sight stopped me cold. The dialysis machine lay shattered on the floor, wires torn apart, its screen cracked and dark. The room smelled faintly of burnt plastic and something sharp, like electricity gone wrong. Lily was sitting on the bed, tears streaming down her face, confused and scared. Her fragile body shook as she tried to understand what had happened. For a moment, I stood frozen, unable to process the destruction before me. How could anyone do this? How could someone be so heartless? I immediately called for help, my voice shaking as I explained the emergency. The local hospital's dialysis unit was swamped, but they managed to send a replacement machine within a few hours. Throughout the wait, I held Lily close, whispering promises that everything would be okay, even as panic churned inside me. Her health depended on that machine functioning perfectly, and now it was gone, destroyed by some unknown act of cruelty. It wasn't long before the whispers started in the neighborhood. People talked about the strange circumstances, the unexplained damage, and slowly a pattern began to emerge. My suspicion fell on Karen, the HOA president, whose increasing hostility toward me and my family had been obvious for months. She had never hidden her disdain for us, especially since I refused to bend to her petty demands. When I confronted her about the incident, her response was chilling. She claimed ignorance, pretending not to know anything about the damage or who might have caused it. Her cold indifference cut deeper than any insult. The community's reaction was mixed. Some neighbors were sympathetic, offering help and support, but many seemed afraid to speak up against Karen. The power she wielded through the HOA made people hesitant to cross her, and I saw how her control extended far beyond petty rules. It was clear she had no respect for the struggles my family faced, no understanding of the stakes involved. To her, we were just another problem to be dealt with, another obstacle on her path. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, I sat alone in the living room, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me. I replayed the day's events over and over, searching for answers, for a way to make sense of the senseless. The thought of my daughter's life hanging by a thread because of someone's cruelty was unbearable. I knew I couldn't let this go unanswered. Karen had to be held responsible, but I also knew I had to be careful. Revealing my identity as chief minister too soon could backfire, and the last thing I wanted was to put my family in more danger. I began quietly gathering evidence, reaching out to neighbors who had seen or heard anything unusual that day. Some were afraid, but others shared whispered stories about Karen's behavior, about how she had been growing more reckless in her pursuit of control. I documented everything, every witness statement, every scrap of proof that could help build a case. I had no intention of letting this injustice stand. For Lily's sake, for my family's future, I was prepared to fight back with every resource at my disposal. As the days passed, the damage to Lily's machine was repaired, but the emotional scars ran deeper. She became quieter, more withdrawn, her trust shaken by the very people who should have cared. Watching her struggle was the hardest thing I had ever faced, but it also steeled my resolve. I promised myself that Karen's reign of terror would end. No one had the right to destroy what little security we had, especially not a woman blinded by her thirst for power. The battle ahead would be difficult, but I was ready. Whatever it took, I would protect my daughter and bring justice to this broken neighborhood. For weeks after the incident, I watched Karen closely, studying the way she carried herself as if nothing had changed. She continued her relentless campaign of control, issuing new rules and fines as though she had no care for the damage she had caused. What struck me most was how completely unaware she was of who I really was. Karen treated me no differently than any other neighbor she despised or sought to dominate. She had no idea that I was the chief minister, that I held a position of power far beyond the limits of this small community. It was almost laughable how blind her arrogance made her. She strutted around the neighborhood, barking orders and making threats, convinced that her authority was absolute. In her eyes, I was just another face to be pushed around, a quiet man who didn't dare challenge her. It was a cruel irony that the person who had so much influence over the state, who could dismantle an organization like this HOA with a single phone call, was being ignored and belittled by someone who ruled over a few houses and a patch of grass. Karen's ignorance was both a weakness and an advantage. It gave me the space to plan, to gather my evidence without raising alarm. I wrestled with the idea of revealing my identity immediately, imagining the shock it would bring her and the swift justice that could follow. But I also knew that such a move might make me the target of even greater hostility or provoke a legal tangle that could drag on, putting my family at risk. Karen thrived on chaos and confrontation, and I had to be smarter than her. There was no rush. I needed to expose her carefully, with undeniable proof, and in a way that would not only end her reign, but send a clear message to anyone who thought they could act with impunity. As I reflected on the situation, it became clear that Karen's ignorance was a dangerous blind spot. She had underestimated the quiet man in her neighborhood, failing to see the strength beneath the calm exterior. I was no longer just a victim or a bystander. I was someone with the power and determination to right this wrong. Knowing that she had no clue about my true position only fueled my resolve. When the time came, the fall would be spectacular, and Karen would finally learn that real power cannot be bullied or broken. After the shock of Lily's dialysis machine being destroyed, my mind was a whirlwind of emotion, but I knew that anger alone would not be enough. I had to be methodical, strategic, and patient. Karen had made a grave mistake underestimating me and the quiet strength I carried behind my calm demeanor. I began to gather every piece of information I could find, determined to build a case strong enough to bring her down. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice for my daughter and for the rest of the community who had been suffocated by Karen's tyranny. The first step was to speak discreetly with neighbors who had witnessed Karen's escalating behavior or had heard her make threats. Many were hesitant, afraid of retaliation or the backlash of crossing the HOA president. But some, quietly frustrated with her reign, were willing to share what they knew. A few spoke of late-night meetings where Karen had berated families. Others recounted incidents of property damage that mysteriously followed her warnings. There was a pattern of intimidation and control that extended far beyond what I had initially seen. I documented every detail carefully, knowing that this evidence would be vital. I also reached out to the maintenance workers and delivery people who frequented the neighborhood. One of them mentioned seeing Karen near Lily's house the day the machine was damaged. She had claimed to be inspecting a complaint, but no official notice had been given to us. This small but significant detail added weight to my growing suspicion that Karen's interference had been deliberate. I collected photographs of the damage, copies of letters and fines issued unfairly, and recordings of some of Karen's most aggressive interactions at community meetings. Each piece fit into the puzzle, painting a clear picture of abuse of power. As the evidence mounted, I began to plan my next move carefully. I could have exposed Karen immediately using my position as chief minister, but I understood the importance of timing and precision. Rushing in could backfire, giving her an opportunity to create chaos or discredit me. Instead, I decided to use the community's growing unease with her leadership as leverage. If I could rally enough support and present an airtight case, Karen's downfall would be undeniable and swift. I also consulted quietly with trusted legal advisors, ensuring that every step I took was within the bounds of the law. This was not about wielding power recklessly. It was about righting a wrong while protecting my family and the community from further harm. I wanted the exposure to be public and thorough, a clear message that no one could break the rules without consequences, especially not those sworn to uphold them. While all of this unfolded, I never lost sight of Lily's well-being. I stayed close to her, making sure the new dialysis machine was working perfectly and that she felt safe in our home. Her strength inspired me every day, reminding me why this fight mattered. Karen's destruction had threatened more than just a machine. It had threatened the fragile balance that kept our family together. The plan was set. I would wait for the perfect moment to reveal everything, to show Karen that beneath the quiet father was a man with the power to protect what mattered most. When the time came, the full weight of the law and public opinion would be on my side. Karen would be forced to answer for her cruelty, and the neighborhood would finally breathe free again. This was not just a battle for justice, but a declaration that those who wield power without compassion will always fall. The day I decided to confront Karen, the air was thick with a quiet tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the neighborhood. I arrived at the community center early, carrying with me the weight of weeks of preparation and a file filled with evidence that could not be ignored. The room was already half full when I stepped inside, neighbors murmuring in hushed tones, some casting nervous glances toward the door where Karen had not yet appeared. She was the center of this gathering, yet today the power she usually wielded so effortlessly felt fragile, as if the ground beneath her was shifting. When Karen finally entered, her confident stride faltered for a brief moment as our eyes met. She did not recognize me at first, or perhaps she refused to acknowledge the man who now stood before her with quiet authority. I introduced myself plainly, revealing my identity as the chief minister. The room grew still, the atmosphere charged with disbelief and surprise. For years, she had treated me as nothing more than an inconvenient neighbor, unaware of the man behind the facade. That revelation alone was enough to shake the foundation of her control. I did not waste time on theatrics. I laid out the evidence methodically, presenting photographs of the damaged dialysis machine, copies of unfair fines, and recorded conversations where Karen had threatened and intimidated community members. Each piece was a thread unraveling the fabric of her authority. I spoke calmly, deliberately, so that every word carried weight. My voice did not rise in anger, but it carried the certainty of justice and consequence. Karen's face shifted through a series of emotions: shock, denial, then fury. She tried to interrupt, to dismiss the evidence as fabrications or misunderstandings, but the community's growing unrest was palpable. Neighbors whispered their own stories of Karen's harshness and cruelty. Some spoke up, lending their voices to the truth I had gathered. The balance of power was tipping, and Karen could feel it. At one point, Karen's bravado cracked. She accused me of abusing my position, of using my office to settle a personal vendetta. I met her accusation with quiet firmness, reminding everyone that this was not about politics but about protecting a vulnerable child and a community betrayed. The law was clear, and the evidence undeniable. The room's silence was a verdict in itself. The final blow came when I informed her that the HOA board had convened in secret and had voted to remove her from her position immediately. The decision was unanimous, a reflection of the community's rejection of her leadership. Karen's world crumbled in that moment. She stood there, powerless and exposed, her reign of control shattered by the very people she had tried to dominate. As she gathered her things and left the room, defeated and silent, I felt a mix of relief and resolve. This confrontation was not just a personal victory but a turning point for the neighborhood. The oppressive shadow Karen had cast was lifting, replaced by a new hope grounded in fairness and respect. Later, as I held Lily close at home, I knew the fight was far from over. But for the first time since the destruction of her dialysis machine, I felt that justice had been served. The community could begin to heal, and I could finally protect my daughter from the cruelty that had threatened her life. The battle had been hard, but it had reminded me of something essential. True power lies not in domination but in the courage to stand up for what is right. After Karen's removal from the HOA presidency, the neighborhood slowly began to breathe again. The tension that had thickened the air for so long started to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. People who had once been silent out of fear now spoke openly about the changes they hoped to see. The community meetings became places of dialogue rather than intimidation, and a new board was elected, one committed to fairness and respect for every family. It felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted, allowing neighbors to reconnect without the looming threat of Karen's harsh rule. For me, the most important thing was the healing of my daughter. The damage done to her dialysis machine had been repaired, and with the replacement in place, Lily's health stabilized. Watching her regain her strength was a quiet victory, a reminder of why I had fought so hard. Her resilience in the face of such adversity inspired me daily, and I vowed to protect that strength fiercely. Our home once again became a sanctuary, filled with the soft hum of the dialysis machine that meant life. The experience changed more than just the community dynamics. It changed me. I had learned that power, when misused, could devastate lives, but that it could also be a force for justice when wielded responsibly. I realized how important it was to remain vigilant, to stand against cruelty even when it hides behind small acts and quiet intimidation. Karen had been a warning, a reminder that evil can thrive in the smallest corners if left unchecked. Neighbors approached me in the weeks after the confrontation, sharing their gratitude and relief. Many expressed how afraid they had been, but how my actions gave them hope. It was humbling to hear their words, and to know that my decision to keep my identity hidden until the right moment had made a difference. It was not about ego or power, but about protecting the vulnerable and restoring dignity to the community. Though the battle had ended, the scars remained. Some families were still healing from the fear and division Karen had sown. It would take time to rebuild trust, but the first steps had been taken. I committed myself to being a presence they could count on, quietly supporting initiatives to improve the neighborhood without interfering or imposing. Leadership was not about control, it was about service. Most of all, this ordeal reinforced the bond between Lily and me. The fight for her safety had tested every part of me, revealing a strength I had not fully recognized before. I learned that love could fuel courage, and that sometimes, standing up meant risking everything for those who cannot fight for themselves. As I watched Lily smile again, her eyes bright with hope, I knew that no matter what came next, we would face it together. The story of Karen and her downfall became a lesson whispered among neighbors, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of standing firm in the face of injustice. It was a reminder that no matter how small a community may seem, the battles fought within it can shape lives in profound ways. And sometimes, the quietest voice is the one that carries the greatest strength. This experience taught me that true strength often lies beneath the surface, hidden behind quiet resilience and unwavering love. Power is not about dominance or fear, but about responsibility and compassion. When those in control forget this, the consequences can be devastating, especially for the most vulnerable among us. My daughter's dialysis machine was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a symbol of hope and survival, and its destruction was a cruel reminder of how fragile life can be. But even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of justice and renewal. Standing up to injustice requires courage, patience, and a willingness to fight not for revenge but for what is right. I learned that sometimes the greatest victories come from perseverance and the quiet determination to protect those you love. Karen's downfall was a necessary reckoning, a reminder that no one is above the law or the bonds that hold a community together. As we move forward, I carry with me the hope that this story will inspire others to speak out against cruelty and to believe in the power of standing firm. In a world that can often feel harsh and unforgiving, it is our compassion and courage that will ultimately define us.